Fáilte. Welcome to this second episode of The Language Question, Ceis na Tangan, a conversation about the Irish language and its history for anyone curious about their relationship with it and its role in our identity. Our guest in this episode is Póilín Nic Géidigh. Póilín is from Gaeltachta in the Donegal Gaeltacht and is a rising star of the Irish language community. As you will hear from my introduction, she has already accomplished an extraordinary amount in a very short career to date. This episode was recorded in October 2022, and you will hear Póilín refer to the then upcoming Oireachtas na Saona 2022, at which Blaire, the programme on Raidió Gaeltachta that Póilín produces, was shortlisted for Radio Series of the Year in 2022, which it has since won. Póilín has also since featured on Shall le Dahi on TG Cahir. I would draw your attention to the distinction that Póilín makes here between the future of the language and the future of the Gaeltacht, as I have found this to be a very important theme coming up again and again in these conversations. I found Póilín's passion for and sense of duty towards the language inspiring. And indeed, I felt that the palpable emotion in her voice when speaking about these things that are so important to her was really moving. Póilín mentions the Caidan a number of times, which I refer to as the Caidan. This refers to standardised official Irish as opposed to the dialectical varieties of Irish spoken naturally in the Gaeltacht. I would really appreciate your feedback and would be eternally grateful if you would follow, rate and review the show. Please also be sure to sign up at thelanguagequestion.com/resources to get your free valuable learning resources and to ensure that you stay up to date with upcoming episodes, guests and to receive exclusive content. Anyhow, here goes with this episode. I hope you enjoy it. Go miniú tú soltas. Póilín Nic Géidigh is a native of the Donegal Gaeltacht. She has a degree in graphic design from the Technical University of Dublin and a master's in media from the University of Galway. She will be familiar to listeners of Raidió Gaeltachta as a regular presenter of Nuacht an Tuaisceart, and she currently produces Blaire, an afternoon magazine show on Raidió Gaeltachta from 3 to 5 on Thursdays and Fridays. Póilín is the proprietor of the online design business maraditch.com and is an active member of the Irish language community online, where she operates under the handle at Pollination. Póilín, a chara, tá fáilte is fitherót agus tám Harabh buachtas as ucht a bhelín an show.
Gur mína maigus flór montas Esteban Charlotte.
Well, I'm so grateful to you to be with us here, Póilín, and it's such a pleasure to welcome you to the show today. Just reading out that intro there, I have to confess, I started to maybe tire halfway through there. It was there's quite a lot to it. I mean, you must be doing this for years. I mean, this is. I mean, how can you have accomplished so much? It's 20 years, 30 years. How long are you doing this?
I one or two maybe.
Yeah.
Everything really started to kick off in 2020, probably for me career wise, because I finished my master's in 2020, and obviously I didn't have a job whenever I finished that master's, and now I have about 6. So
yeah, it's phenomenal. It's extraordinary. I mean, I just mahu. And so thank you for taking the time. Somebody who is so busy taking time to join us here today. We really appreciate it. And Póilín, but what I started off with is that you are a native of the Donegal Gaeltacht and a native speaker who grew up in a very vibrant Irish language family and community. And I think that's something that I would love to just dive a little bit into here today, and so grateful to you, first of all, for having this conversation, as Béarla, first of all, because it's something that I think a lot of maybe learners and people like me who are coming to the language from having had no proficiency in the language previously and always wanted to kind of, if you like, learn and deepen their knowledge and in it. So it's a great opportunity to speak about those experiences, maybe that for people who wouldn't be able to do so as Gaeilge Gaeltacht. And so Molly, would you mind telling us, first of all, about your experience growing up? I mean, you grew up as a native speaker. What was that like? What are your kind of reflections on that now, looking back on it?
I suppose when you grow up as a native speaker, you don't really notice that you have anything that's any different to anyone else. I think when we were going through school, I think my parents played a huge role in making us speak Irish. Not that we had to at the start, like. When we were growing up, we didn't have any English until we were maybe 3 years old. And so conversing with other family members was sort of not a thing for us. We would have a translator and one of our parents. But I think you don't really, and this is something that's come up for me, whenever we were at school, the teachers would constantly be telling the children of the Gaeltacht to be speaking Irish to each other, even though for some people it was more natural than other people. But I only really gained sort of a proper respect for the language and what I had from birth whenever I went to college, and I sort of left the Gaeltacht and I saw sort of what a precious commodity it is for the rest of the country and for the language itself, and the fact that it is sort of in danger, and that I am the next generation, and that it is sort of my duty to uphold that precious jewel that we have on the coasts and Meath and all over the country. So really, growing up, to tell you the truth, I didn't really think too much about the fact that I had Irish, um, and how important it was to me. And I never realized how much a part of my identity it was until I did leave the Gaeltacht when I went to college. So when I did go to college, you found yourself sort of protecting or being very defensive over the Gaeltacht. It's a bit like anything else. It's when somebody from the countryside goes to the city and they sort of have to defend their county, but you're also defending this other thing that nobody really understands if they didn't go through it. So it was a difficult one, because if you are from the Donegal Gaeltacht, your Irish is nothing like the Irish of anyone that you go to college with. If you go to Dublin and you meet someone, say from Cork or from Galway, or that someone who went to a Gael school in Dublin, their Irish is completely different, and they have these sort of internal biases against the Donegal Irish because it can be so different at points from the other dialects. So you're sort of on an uphill battle most of the time.
So you're kind of, you're feeling up against it in terms of coming to the city from the country, speaking Irish, and not only speaking Irish, you're speaking Donegal.
Everything is against.
It's a bit of a hat trick. Yeah. Okay.
It's a hat trick of feeling a bit left out. So so that was difficult for me, and I think a lot of people from the Gaeltacht where I'm from and people that I went to college with, we sort of didn't really attend any of the Common Gaelach events or anything like that, or try and connect with any other Irish speakers in the city because of that. And it was only in later years when I had to actually sort of run events myself that I had to get to know these people that sort of had laughed at me basically in first year and had been like, oh God, I hated that bit of the Leaving Cert whenever the Donegal Irish segment came on. It's like we were this big national joke, and it hurts whenever that's sort of what you speak, and you sort of think, am I the one in the wrong? Should I be changing how I speak? But you shouldn't. And you're as valid as anyone else. Just because you come from a certain bit of the country, it doesn't mean that your Irish is any less valid than what's in the books. I mean, when we were growing up, it was a constant battle of us against the Caijan, and in all the school books, we had to have the teacher nearly translate to us what some of the questions meant for the Leaving Cert or things like that. Words like cahan meant kinwur, and we didn't understand the cahan meant what, like at what time or when. We had to sort of learn this whole new vocabulary just to pass standardized tests. Cahan conas wasn't a thing. That's how, which is kindoi, and then we have kajay, which is what, and that's probably sort of conas as well. But I feel like that's nearly a battle of most native dialects against the Caijan. Certainly whenever we were reading books that weren't from our Gaeltacht when we were on national school and in secondary school, it sort of meant that people who weren't really interested weren't really pulled in by that section of learning. Like, they weren't interested in those books, they weren't interested in those stories or poems or anything like that, because they didn't relate to it and they didn't understand it, and they felt stupid for not understanding it, because like, surely they had Irish, so why can't they understand something that's in Irish?
You open up so many different things here that I was hoping to dive into over the course of the conversation, and we'll start get to them. But I mean, even just go straight in there, because I'm somebody who's come back to the language, or when I say back to the language, don't think I was ever there to begin with in terms of my education, but somebody who has come to the language late in life, but I do recall. In secondary school, I went to a boarding school in Dublin for the second half of my secondary education. The first half it had been in West Cork, where it wasn't a native speaking part of the country by any means, but certainly what Irish we spoke was in school was with the Munster dialect. And I remember talking about Rinne Darude or Ruddigan, and people would say, what are you actually talking about? And it's Jarmid and so on. But I remember coming to to school in Dublin, and we had Peg, for the infamous Peg, which I have actually reread since and absolutely find a fantastic book, an amazing woman. But on the one hand, we had Peg and we had Céis Dallin by Seamus O'Greenon. And so you have these two textbooks on the same curriculum. From one is hardcore kind of, Blasket Island, Munster Irish, and the other is, the
hardcore Ranafast.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like, the idea that this kid and then the kid's being taught in the Caidán, and then you have these two. I mean, and they're the absolute, they're the as you say, the jewels of the language. But I mean, like, if you were facing that as a challenge as a native speaker, I mean, God help any of the rest of us who are trying to learn the language. I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I suppose that brings up its own challenges in terms of the curriculum, like the fact that we have a national strategy for the language when we have different sorts of language all around the country is problematic in itself. And really, we should be looking at a localized version of Irish teaching, which is a lot more difficult than just throwing out the same test to everyone. And I think the curriculum and the teaching of Irish is something that comes up very often whenever a native speaker is speaking to someone about Irish, or when they find out you're a native speaker and they go, "Oh God, I hated that at school," and you're like, "Well, it's not just a school subject; it's my life, and it's my identity." So you can't just write it off because you didn't like sitting down and reading this book, And that's sort of one of the things that I think Irish speakers or native Irish speakers, especially, get sick of hearing is I had a terrible teacher, so I didn't chance even thinking about the language since, because I had one person that wasn't nice to me in first year of school, And it's upsetting that people sort of think like that. I find it kind of closed-minded, but I don't blame those people either, because what other option were they given? That's all they know. I remember I was in a restaurant a few weeks ago in Galway City with my boyfriend who has Connemara Irish. He's not from there, but he learned Irish and he has Connemara Irish, and the two of us speak Irish to each other. And we were having this conversation, and this woman beside us, whenever her husband left the table, who I presumed was her husband, we were sort of trying to eavesdrop, but they were slightly too far away, and she said, Tá war ngáil go hálainn, and we both sort of went, "Oh God, have we been talking about her? I hope not," because she must have understood us. But she immediately launched into, "I love to hear it spoken, but I hated it. I had a terrible teacher when I was 4 years old, and she beat me when I didn't understand, so I just turned against the language." And we sort of went, "Oh God, another one." And sort of, it's one of those stories that comes up again and again and again. And while I don't blame those people, it's sort of, at the same time, in my head, I'm like, well, what's your excuse now? What was your excuse the whole time? And if you have this so-called appreciation that you're telling me you do have for the language, then why are you still providing excuses as to why you don't know anything about it or don't know how to speak it?
I think that's just so true of so many aspects of things in life that people kind of regret and say that they wish they would have been. I mean, and it's open to any of us just to start right now. But Póilín, just talk about so you. I mean, I remember reading a piece you wrote, I think, for a blog post in Raidió after there talking about growing up, because you mentioned was it Kigaran na Bunti was your first conscious awareness of Irish. Could you explain that to me?
Yeah, so Kigaran na Bunti was a scheme by Donegal Gaeltacht, and a fantastic scheme that they should bring back, and I'll get into that in a wee minute if you remind me of it if I go off on a tangent. But Kigaran na Bunti was a scheme where an inspector would come around the school and pull children from their class in their family unit. So say me and my brother were the only two in school together in national school at that time. So I was probably only around 5 years old. He was probably 9. But Kigaran na Bunti would just pull you into a room and have a natural conversation with you in Irish about what does your mommy and daddy do, where are you from, what's your favourite subject. It was a very simple conversation. It was, if you didn't know what was going on, you sort of be like, this woman's very friendly and just wants to know about my life. It was just a short interview about you and your family. It's nearly like the Irish oral was now, but in a sort of more natural setting where you didn't have anything learned off. It was just to see children of the Gaeltacht and their standard of Irish, and if you passed Cigir na Bunty's test or Cigir na Bunty's test, you would get a grant. So your family would get money for being native Irish speakers. And Cigir na Bunty, at that stage, nobody would have had anything learned off in readings like they do for the Leaving Cert oral. Cigir na Bunty would have just come around because you're too young to learn stuff off. But I remember the first time I was aware that it was a test to see if we got money or not was whenever she asked what our mommy did, and we weren't really sure. We weren't really sure what the job was, or
Okay.
we knew she worked in what we colloquially called the tech, but that was only the sort of place she worked in. It wasn't her actual job. She worked with the VEC, or like the Educational Training Board, as it's called now. But I remember my brother saying she worked in a tech, and my mum asking him, like, what did you tell Cigir na Bunty that I did? And he said, I said you work good about the tech. Like, I guess, like, we thought tech was an Irish word because, you know,
it's what everybody uses. Yeah.
Locally, what was used in our house. And I don't think it went against us in any way, but I remember she was like, what was it? We had to learn off her job title, which was Jivion. It was some sort of she was an adult literacy organizer, which was an agar her Ejahash EC, or some sort of title role like that. And I remember just Ejahash EC being stuck in my head for the next time Cigir na Bunty would rock up in like Tashi Gubber Lishan Agriact Ejahash EC and BEC. Like, it was sort of just something that was the only thing I remember consciously learning off, and that's how I knew that it was a test. And that's the only way I knew it was a test, was because we had to figure out what her job title was.
but I think that interesting, because that also brings up something that I've just noticed before. Is like, let's say these very, very Kaidani accurate words for let's say, you know, jobs that, you know, maybe don't exist in a traditional context or whatever, or even just, you know, sophisticated words for modern technology, things like that. That produces some kinds of funny. You have maybe people who are in the Gaeltacht who are using loan words from English much more commonly, I think.
Very much so. And I remember my mommy actually telling me that whenever she came, because she learned Irish herself, she wasn't from the Gaeltacht and she wasn't a native speaker, but she said that when she came to the Gaeltacht for the first time to meet my daddy's family, that she said, I'm going to put something in the Kushnor, and that his mother turned around and said, Kushnor? You mean the fridge? Shtas a fridge, because we all say shtas a fridge. We don't say Kushnor. It's not natural. It's because we had old Irish, so this new technology wasn't included in the language whenever the older people were growing up. So anything new that came in was its English word, and there was no charma.ie at that stage for or any sort of board that sat down and came up with these words for new technologies. It was just the fridge, and everyone knew it was called the fridge, so you still call it the fridge.
Yeah, no, I love that, and it's something I'd like to just maybe come back to that, because I think that's just interesting in terms of the evolution. And if a language is going to be a living language, there has to be an evolution. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that, maybe in terms of when we talk about the future, how you see what that's looking like. But can I just come back maybe to your experience? Because I mean, I suppose I'm thinking the Cigir na Bunty. I remember reading that piece you wrote saying that this was the first time you became consciously aware that this was something that maybe, let's say, wasn't just that everybody was doing this, and then going to college was the first time, or you felt maybe going outside the Gaeltacht and living there. But what did that look like? I mean, was your friend network primarily people from the Gaeltacht? Was that possible to maintain when going to college, or how did that unfold for you?
For me, it was funny because I had a friend that I spoke Irish and English to, and I still sort of speak both to her. And she would be one of those friends where when we were growing up, our parents would ask, do you speak Irish or English to each other? And I'd go, oh, mix. Whereas I knew that sort of she was more inclined to turn to English because she probably would speak more English at home. But she went to college with me and did the exact same course. So when we arrived there, we met another girl who was also from the Donegal Gaeltacht. But because we were in this big college setting and they had met before I met, because they were on a scheme together before I had even arrived in the college, because I arrived a week late or something. They had met, formed a relationship, they were friends, and they were speaking English to each other. So I arrived and I didn't even know she had Irish. So the three of us spoke English together, and we developed a friend group with also other people in the class who all spoke English to each other, but we all had Irish. And that's sort of the problem that people in the Gaeltacht are up against whenever they meet in a setting that's not promoting Irish, or where it's not seen as a benefit to be speaking Irish, because everyone thinks you're talking about them. Like, everyone in our class was paranoid whenever the three of us were doing group work, because I would say we would sort of naturally turn to Irish if the three of us were speaking alone and if we were doing group projects. And because we were friends, when we had to split into threes to do a project, the three of us chose each other. So we would sort of make a joke out of it and call ourselves the Gaeltacht corner of the room. And some of the rest of our class would be sort of paranoid that we were speaking about them, even though there were a few people in that class that had been to a Gael school, but I don't remember ever speaking to those people in Irish. And it's, when you look back at it, like, we should have, but you just don't have that sort of, when you are 18, 19 in a new place, nervous, you don't have that sort of cop on to be like, well, if somebody has Irish, I should be speaking Irish to them. But you're in an English setting, so it doesn't make sense to. Like, if that person from the Gael School had come in to visit us in, say, here in Raidió na Gaeltachta, it would be a no-brainer for me to speak Irish to them. But because we were in DIT in our college, surrounded by people who spoke English, you just spoke English to them, because they only brought up maybe 2 weeks in that they had gone to a Gael school when they heard us speaking Irish to each other, and we would have a short conversation in Irish at that point. But going forward, you wouldn't really sort of
It wouldn't be your default language that you would
Yeah.
you would just go into. Yeah.
I think that's the problem. The problem is your first contact is your default language with that person, and it's very difficult to change that. And I've noticed that, especially with friends that I have that have Irish, that aren't comfortable speaking Irish, because I would have interacted them primarily through friend groups that I had that spoke English to each other, because people in the group didn't have Irish. So I would be speaking to a friend, but I would be texting them in English or talking to them in English, because I wouldn't have an experience speaking Irish to them. And it's strange. And it's something that I now actively correct, as I sort of know now, but I didn't at that time. And it's something I should have known to correct at that stage. But when you're, again, 18, 19, you just don't know, and you don't know that you should be correcting yourself, because you don't have any sense of duty towards the language. And neither do the people who go to Gael schools, because they don't have that, like, people in the Gaeltacht who are just leaving school, it's very difficult to get them to have that sort of mindset of, if you have Irish and another person has Irish, you should be speaking Irish to them instead of English, even if there's people around you who speak English. And that is the basic thing about the Irish language and how difficult it is to use in daily life, because it doesn't matter, any minority language, if there are 5 people in a group who have Irish and the 6th person has English, the whole group will speak English, because everyone's trying to be polite. And that's our politeness will be our downfall, and we just need to be a bit more thick, I think, and start saying, well, you'll understand most of it because you only did your Leaving Cert 3 years ago, so we'll try and speak slowly, but we're too nice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things I find, for instance, I'm now coming to it, learning slowly, and for me, like, let's say we're having this conversation in English. And in a way, we perhaps should be doing it in Irish, but I specifically chose to have the conversations in English in order to facilitate learners who, are maybe not on that stage in the journey yet where they could participate fully in a full blown discussion. But by the same token, if you and I were to go into Irish, we both know that we can have a much more proficient, efficient conversation us Béarla because, I'm able to speak proficiently in English, but not in Irish. But for you to speak to me in Irish, yeah, that's hard work for you. How does that work? I mean, this is your native language. Are you stuck having to talk to people and you're almost doing kind of community service, having subpar conversations with people who aren't really good enough yet?
I think that's an interesting point, actually, and it's something that comes up with learners, and it's something that comes up in this job, certainly, whenever you're speaking to people from, even not even learners, people from other Gaeltachts, who don't have your sort of speed and efficiency of speech that you would have with somebody who's sitting across from you in an office and the same dialect that you work in, or the same proficiency that you would have in English. It's it's you have to work to slow yourself down when you're speaking to other people. And I remember uh, when I first started going out with my boyfriend, there was a good 6 months where the two of us were definitely sailing through some conversations, having missed about half of what we were saying because there were certain words or things that were happening that, like, I would make an offhand comment kind of quickly, and he would go, "What?" And by the time that I had explained myself, it would sort of be over. It's nearly like going out with someone from a different country. Like, it's mad, but we don't have that problem anymore because we understand each other, and I have developed this sort of proficiency in listening to other dialects from my job and from having friends in every single or Gaeltacht, well, nearly, that I can listen to and understand. But the problem is that sometimes they don't understand me. So I have to physically slow myself down, and I think this happens in English as well because I got told I was a mumbler quite often, um, where I speak too fast, and it's a very conscious decision to change the way that you're speaking in any language, I think. So if you go and you have to slow down your speech, if you have to change words, and if you have to sort of sit and think of, it's nearly like a test of, can you think of all these alternative words for stuff that you might be saying that a learner kind of wouldn't understand? So if I was saying something and I had the Irish word for it in Donegal Irish, and you, for example, didn't know what I was saying, I would have to then sit and think of an alternative way to explain that in Irish if I didn't want to switch to English, or else I would switch to the word in English, which I don't want to do and I try not to do. I try to explain things in Irish, or I try to think of the word in your dialect, which has me sort of doing a lot more mental gymnastics than I would normally in a normal conversation. And I think that adds to it. I have no problem doing that, but some people would sort of struggle. But because I do it on a daily basis, I don't mind as much, you know?
Yeah, because it's funny. I was talking to another native speaker who was based in Dublin, working in a state job, and was telling me about there was another native speaker in another section of the company who was from a different dialect and dialectic area, and he said that we would just speak to each other in English because we just, first of all, it's a technical profession that they're in, and they're saying, look, I don't have the vocabulary in Irish for speaking about a lot of this kind of technical stuff, and just it's easier for us to speak in English rather than to speak to each other in our respective dialects. Now,
Yeah.
it's just such a huge challenge for a language that has so few speakers to begin with, and then you have it broken down into the different community. And I mean, what are your thoughts around that, those kinds of challenges?
I think the thing is, I think it needs to start earlier. First of all, I think every dialect needs to develop its own sort of methods of teaching and learning within that language. But I also think there needs to be a focus put on understanding what different words mean in different dialects and increasing um, the sort of, or getting rid of that barrier nearly to understanding that dialect. So instead of providing everyone with a washed down sort of half baked attempt at sort of acknowledging different dialects in the current curriculum, that you would do your own curriculum, but you would have segments where you would say, well, these words mean these words and these other dialects, and we'll have a test on these once a week, just so you can have a basic conversation with this person if you happen to meet them, and have more. I think there needs to be more exchanges of these people in terms of, like, we should be going. Children from the Gaeltacht in Donegal should be going to the Gaeltacht in Galway and Kerry, like students from Dublin go to the Gaeltacht in Donegal, Galway, Kerry. Like, there should be no barriers to accessing a 2 weeks in the Gaeltacht to immerse yourself in a language that isn't yours, because the best thing that I ever did for my understanding of Connemara Irish was spend 2 weeks there on a drama camp completely unrelated to the Irish language. It was run through Irish, but it exposed me to different types of speech, because people from all over the country and all over the Gaeltachta, people who had Irish, were meeting there, and that was really beneficial to us for understanding these other people. And we didn't have, because everyone was sort of from a Gaeltacht school or from a Gael school, we didn't have that same sort of thing um oh, Donegal Irish is crap, because you hadn't even reached the leaving cert yet. You haven't even done that much work in terms of listening tests and things. And I think that needs to sort of uh start from the ground up nearly. Of there should be more grants available to Gaeltacht students or students from the Gaeltacht to access other Gaeltachts, and there should be more of a relationship between the dialects, not to take away from anyone's dialect, and not to lessen your understanding of your own dialect, or try and make you speak in this weird um cocktail of all dialects, or to make some weird Cajun Irish. But you should be able to speak your own language to these people and they would understand you. And I feel like that would really benefit people from here, and seeing that there are people that are exactly like them in other places, and that they're not alone, and that speaking English isn't really cool. Like, because that was the big thing. It was like speaking Irish wasn't cool whenever I was growing up, and that's why everyone spoke English to each other, because English was what you saw on TV, and English was what people in the other schools spoke, and it was what people on the internet spoke, and nobody else had Irish. So you were an outcast nearly from birth in terms of your surrounding media. If I didn't have Radio in the Gaeltacht, I wouldn't be aware that there was any other person that had Irish outside my community.
Really?
Yeah.
But I hear from you that you feel that has changed or is changing, or what are your thoughts around that?
Absolutely. And I think we and I personally am trying to do a lot of work to change that, and providing different media formats for people in the Gaeltacht and people who have Irish to express themselves or to see media through Irish. I'm part of a TikTok group where we upload videos in Irish and don't provide any English subtitles. And Block TG does the same thing, but they provide English subtitles for a lot of their things, just to attract learners and things like that. But we try and provide. We're called an Gaeltacht, TUKT, like a TikTok, because we are total immersion of Irish online, and for children or for teenagers who are growing up watching TikToks and who want to understand what we're saying.
And is that something that you consciously, does that reflect the kind of, if you like, your reaction to the experience that you had when you were growing up, that you want to provide an experience for other people to realize that, okay, this is cool, this is, yeah, I'm not weird here, I'm not on my own here.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important for teenagers and children and people in the Gaeltacht, or for everyone basically going through the school system, to know that people are living their lives through the Irish language, and that it's possible to do so, and that I have built a whole career through the Irish language that I wouldn't probably be able to achieve through English, let's be honest, if I didn't know the right people or things like that. Like, I am able to put these things up online in Irish and build a community of Irish speakers that are all over the country and all over the globe. And when you provide that service, I think it makes people, like, even when we get comments from people, that we get some negative comments about, like, oh, why is this a thing? The Irish is a dead language. Why is anyone bothering to do this? And you're there like, well, we are 4 people of many who watch us. We have over 10,000 followers on TikTok. And we are 4 people who live our lives through Irish, and who want to show that it's more than just a school subject. It's a way of life, and there's a whole world there that you don't know about just because you're not speaking Irish, you know? It's like an underground world where there's parties and there's media formats and there's things going on that, like, you wouldn't have access to if you were only an English speaker, and it's sort of trying to explain that there's a whole culture there that is untapped and that people don't recognize just due to the fact that they were never shown.
Well, let's reveal some of that, so shall we? What does that community network look like? What does it, I mean, because I suppose I would be a little intimidated to a certain extent because I can consume that passively and I can listen and I understand, an increasing amount, but certainly not all of it. But my ability to actually get actively involved is limited. And then it's a bit like the converse of what you were describing previously, where, you don't know if it's cool to actually participate because maybe you're just not sufficiently proficient. So like, I mean, do you have to be a native speaker to be able to kind of get involved in that? Or how this is another thing that I've often found is how do people of differing abilities kind of, if you like,
interact,
get into this? Yeah.
So one thing I will say, that group that I just mentioned, there are 4 of us, and I am the only native speaker in that group. So the other person, Rory, went to a Gaelscoil. His parents don't speak Irish. Leah went to the Gaeltacht in Ranafast when she was at school and developed a love for Irish, and I think possibly then went to a Gaelscoil in Monaghan. And Connor went to a Gaelscoil in Letterkenny. So it's not like we are only native speakers providing for native speakers. We are providing for people who interact with Irish or have any sort of Irish. And the people who comment go, I understood most of this. I'm so proud of myself, the people who are at school and things like that. So you get those. But I think in terms of how people who are trying to break into that sort of social sphere, if you're trying to, is to attend events in Irish. There are pop-up Gaeltachta for people of all abilities all over the country and the world. And there are football teams like the Gaeltacht in Dublin, where people of all footballing and Irish ability are welcome. And there are, I have to say, the biggest thing for me would be Twitter, because there are people that I know from Twitter that I've never met in real life. And I think Twitter, once you start speaking Irish on Twitter, you sort of find your tribe nearly. And if you follow certain speakers, that they would lead you to more speakers. And sort of there's this whole bubble on there that nobody really knows about unless they go looking for it. And nearly if you ask anyone for recommendations or follow these accounts and comment under people's things in Irish, that you will sort of build that community around yourself. It's not that we are a group that you have to break into. It's you create your own group of people around you. And then there are massive events like Oireachtas na Saona, which is going to happen the first week of November this year, where Irish speakers are going to collect in one place, and it's a big hoolie and everyone is going to have a great time. But I have to say, personally, for us, the biggest way that I find more people who speak Irish, and because it's part of my job, I have to seek out Irish speakers to speak on certain subjects. And for the radio show which I work for, like, I have to find people who have specialist subjects. And I find them through Twitter, I find them through Instagram, I search hashtags, I look for people who are commenting under other people's Instagrams who post in Irish. And there are so many people that you can find through other people, and it's just sort of about building that network around yourself. And I'm very lucky that I work in media and that I have that opportunity to do that as a profession, nearly, to find all these people that I can then sort of say, when I meet them in real life at something like the Oireachtas, that I sort of have a relationship with them already, even though I've never met them. And that's something that happened with Leah, the girl from Monaghan that I'm in the Gaeltacht with on TikTok. I didn't meet her until this year, a few months ago, after being in a group with her for 2 years and considering her a very good friend. I met her in real life for the first time whenever she came to Gweedore, and we interviewed her for Blada. And I met her in person, and she was a lot taller than I thought.
That's really interesting in terms of how that community grows up. But it's still, let's look at if we, and I want to come back to the question of identity here, because I think and how Irish language and identity interact. Let's look at Ireland as an increasingly multicultural, diverse country, with people coming here from abroad who maybe have no connection with our heritage, our culture, our language previously, and who have now established here and are raising their kids and living their lives here. How do we bring them into that kind of conversation or into the use of the Irish language?
It's actually funny because I think people who come here from different countries nearly respect the language more so than the people who were born here. Because a lot of those people come from a country where they have their own language. So they see Irish as, oh, this is the native language of this country. Okay. And they're like, they're a lot more receptive to it, I think. And I think if you already have two languages, adding a third can be a lot easier. And I think that's true for all languages. And I think that bringing them into the conversation is just about reaching out and letting them attend Gaelscoileanna and providing supports for parents, maybe night classes in Irish and homework classes that would help their child through things that like homework. But you really do have to start with the youth, I think, because if you're in a school that's teaching Irish as a subject, you shouldn't automatically just be given an exemption just because you've come from a different circumstance or you have a learning difficulty or you're from a different country. You shouldn't just automatically be given an exemption, because I think that is, not to say the lazy way out, but I think it cuts a lot of people out of the conversation who might have wanted to be included but have said, oh, well, they're allowing me not to do it, so I may as well not do it because I'll have less homework. I know a lot of people with dyslexia who never got a chance to do Irish at school because they were given an automatic exemption, because it was another language, when there is actually there are several studies that show that having two languages isn't actually the isn't actually an issue for people with dyslexia, and learning a new language isn't sort of, if you're doing it, you just need to adjust your learning or your teaching sort of methods for people with dyslexia. It's not about rote learning and learning words and things like that. If you send someone to totally immerse themselves in the Gaeltacht, whether they can write it down or not, they might learn some things, and reading it and things like that. It's all about providing supports for people, and those supports aren't there currently, which is why people are just doled out an exemption if they come from a different country, or if they have dyslexia, or if they have any sort of uh, exception to their learning needs, where they could have been supported, but instead they have been offered an out of learning this language. And then I feel like those people are actually cheated of that opportunity, when they didn't have to be, but they probably didn't recognize at that time that they were cheated of that opportunity. It was probably a nice break for them, to be honest, to miss that. And I think that's a sort of a systemic issue more so than something that Irish speakers can offer. That's something that needs to be addressed from the curriculum and from the government up, instead of from the Irish community, because for example, the Ukrainians that have been sent to the Gaeltacht here in Gweedore have been sent to the Irish schools here, the Irish speaking national schools here, and they're speaking to them in Irish. They don't have English or Irish, so why would we default to English? So some of the national schools have been speaking to their new Ukrainian students in Irish, and those students are learning Irish, and some of the parents want to learn Irish because that's the place where they've been put and they want to interact with the community. But I think that's also an issue with the people of the Gaeltacht, where we're trying to be nice to people and speak to them in English, but the reality is they don't have the English either. So why wouldn't we speak to them in Irish and try and teach them a new language? Do you know, it's a very complicated issue, and something that I am not in the least bit qualified to be talking about, I think. But as a native Irish speaker, I think we're always going to welcome people who want to help us. And I think protecting the Gaeltachta is a massive issue at the minute, more so than saving the Irish language, because I personally think the language will be fine. I am very concerned for the Gaeltacht.
Mm. Well, I think you've come on to something really, really significant there now, and maybe that people mightn't appreciate. Would you mind just explaining your concerns around that and what that looks like for you in reality?
So in reality, it looks like people with Irish not speaking Irish to their children, because say a thing that comes up quite often with parents in the Gaeltacht, um, new parents might have a child that doesn't start to speak because they're speaking Irish to the child, and I think it's been studied, and children that are exposed to two languages from birth may take longer to speak, but that's just sort of because they're processing. Um, but new parents can freak out that their child hasn't started speaking yet, and there's this comparison between why hasn't my child started speaking whenever they should have started speaking by now, and they go to a speech therapist who says just speak one language to the child, and they say just speak English to the child, and that is detrimental to both the child and the parent in the long run, really, whenever Irish is the language of the home and was up till that point. But people are scared. They just want their child to be sort of happy and healthy and be able to process language. And at that stage, you're sort of like, okay, well, if we have to do this, we will. And that family starts speaking English to each other when they would have spoken Irish to each other already. Um, Parents need to be encouraged to speak English to their child. Your child is going to speak back to you in the language that they hear at school and that they think is cool, but you are the parent and you have to parent your child and say, why are you speaking English to me? Because we both have Irish. So, and they have to sort of have that mindset. I think it's very difficult for me to say as a person who doesn't have any children. I'm sure eventually I might come up against it, but um I have enough sort of experience with this side of having Irish, this duty to protect the Gaeltacht and the language, where I am sort of the word in Irish is rein, but it's sort of thick and stubborn. I'm stubborn enough to say, no, you are going to speak Irish to me because we have Irish. I'm raising you with Irish, and that is the language of this house, and there is no alternative. You can speak English to your friends, but you shouldn't be because they also have Irish. And that is the main problem at the minute in the Gaeltachta is that people aren't speaking Irish to their children, so their children don't stand a chance when they grow up. They have no respect for the language, and they speak English to their friends at school because their understanding of the language is weaker as a result, and that is weakening the Gaeltacht because children in Gaeltacht schools are speaking English to each other, and then coming, or if they are speaking Irish in schools, I'm not blaming the schools because there was a study recently and there was a news story recently that children are going to school speaking Irish there, coming home and speaking English to their parents or speaking English at home. And it's all about strengthening that relationship in the home because I think, and I've listened to several people speak about this over the years, the Gaeltacht has to save itself. We all have to have this mindset, but we currently don't because I don't know if it's we were never given the education. We never saw the benefit. It's sort of a colonial hang up, I think, where English is the language of the rich or the language of work and the language of the working world and not just uh, and the functional language of the world and that every child should have English. But when the reality is that your child isn't going to learn Irish from anywhere else, they're going to learn Irish at school, grand, but they're not going to have the same standard of Irish from learning at school as they would have at home. And that is where the issue lies because the child will learn English. There should be no concern that the child isn't going to learn English because they're going to be surrounded with it every minute of every day through the media, through TV, through the internet, through whatever thing you plonk in front of them to keep them quiet. They're gonna see something with English. So there should be no concern. And I think this should be there should be some sort of outreach program through the language planning officers to parents to sort of provide this education of your child will learn English, but you have to speak Irish to your child. Otherwise, they will not have the same standard of Irish as you have, even though you think they might. But it has to start from the Gaeltacht out because nobody is going to come in and save us.
And so talk about that in terms of your own view of the world. I was kind of joking with you at the beginning. I mean, you've had quite a meteoric rise in terms of your career so far. But as well, that also coincided, I think, with we had, of course, this COVID thing for the last couple of years. We haven't been able to travel. We've all been stuck here to a certain extent. And do you see living in the Gaeltacht, is that something you would see kind of permanently, that's there's no question, but that's always going to be part of your life? Or do you see yourself moving out of that environment? What does that mean for you?
Well, I think in the short term, I don't think I'll be in the Gaeltacht forever in terms of, and from, say, I'm only 25 and I would like to travel and see other places, but I think eventually I will settle in some sort of Gaeltacht if it still exists at that point. I think the lines need to be redrawn. Um, the border lines of the Gaeltacht need to be redrawn, and focus needs to be put more on focusing on those families. And that's why I was saying earlier about shame, Kigged in the Bunty. It doesn't exist anymore, but it should, because it gives people a sense of pride. And my child is getting the Punty, which was the currency at the time, but my child is getting the money because they can speak Irish. That gives families a sense of pride. And it also puts money in their pocket. There's a financial incentive, and there's a sort of a local smugness about it, that your child is getting something that English monolingual children aren't getting, because they have this extra, and it is a gift. It is a gift to have a language from birth, and I am well aware of that now, even though I wasn't whenever I was at school, and when I was growing up I was not aware. And I think that needs to start from within the schools. I think people like me, and like people that are working with Irish their whole lives, need to be in speaking to children from primary school, in secondary school, to go in and say that you have been given a gift and you should be using that gift as much as possible, because there are opportunities now that there never were before for Irish speakers. You don't have to just be a teacher or just be a translator in Brussels in the EU. Like, there are so many options in terms of your career and how you can use it, that you shouldn't be shooting yourself in the foot by taking away something that is an extra string to your bow.
I couldn't agree with you more, and it's because it's such a. I mean, it's something I'm extraordinarily envious of anybody having that. To me, it's an extraordinary gift to have, and it's so wonderful your view of it. Tell me finally, Pauline, could we just talk about the idea of identity? I mean, it's very clear from everything you've been saying to us, and in terms of your concern for the Gaeltacht. Can you talk about your personal sense of identity and language and culture in place? How do those things all kind of come together for you in terms of your sense of self and what you take from the language and the place that you grew up in?
Yeah, I think especially in recent years, in the last 2 years, I've been living at home in the Gaeltacht. So, and my job is in Irish. I speak to my friends in Irish. I have a relationship with someone through Irish, and the only English in my life at the minute is whenever I speak to family members that don't have Irish. And that has meant that my life and my sense of self has been sort of completely intertwined with the language, and it's now sort of more a part of me than it ever was. And it probably is more than it, I wouldn't say more than it ever will be, but it's certainly at a peak now that it has never been at before. And I assume if I leave to go somewhere else, that it'll sort of lessen, or if I get a job in something that isn't in Irish media, that it will eventually lessen. But I know, because I'm from here, that I will always come back to it, and that I have obviously certain aspects of my life that are quite permanent that I do use Irish in. So it'll always be there, and it always has been. It's just been lying a bit more dormant in certain parts of it than it is now. So I think I see myself primarily through the lens of the Irish language, more so now than ever. And I think that I am a woman from the Gaeltacht, and that is something that is how I would describe myself nearly to somebody. I am an Irish speaker. I'm a native Irish speaker. It is part of me. And I think that's nearly unshakable at the minute. And it was very easily shaken up till this point. I don't know if it's part of growing up and becoming sort of, and just getting older and realizing that about yourself. But for me, Irish is who I am, and it always will be, probably from now, because I have such a sense of duty towards where I'm from, and the language and the media surrounding me, and the fact that there are people out there who don't have that sense of duty is something that I personally, it sort of angers me that they haven't had the opportunity to realise that yet. And I think that mindset is lying dormant in so many people who are in the Gaeltacht. And I think that is my main priority at the minute, in terms of when I meet people, that I make a conscious effort to speak to them in Irish if I know they have Irish. And that has taken me a long time to get to, but I've got there, and I feel like I can only keep going and keep talking to people and keep sort of being that annoying person who's always like, why aren't you speaking Irish? You know, it's like you have to become stubborn, and I hate that, but you have to, because we're only going to be able to save ourselves. So as I said, I have no worry about the Irish language currently, but I have a very deep concern that I am sort of I don't want to say that I'm the word in Irish is édóchasa, which means hopeless, which it isn't. I am just concerned for the dialects. I'm concerned for Severus. I'm the richness of the language. I am so concerned for the Gaeltachta, because of the outside influence of English speakers coming to the Gaeltacht, because it's a gorgeous place to be, because of Irish speakers not being able to get planning permission in their home place, even though they have land. Just external factors that are making people struggle to keep their livelihood in the Gaeltacht. And I think that is my main issue at the minute, and I think that is sort of my focus moving forward, and that I will try as much as I can, as hard as I can, through every medium that I can, to spread the good word and to help people try and achieve that mindset.
Well, I have to say, Póilín, I can't think of a better person to taking up that huge challenge. And I don't want to make light of it, because I mean, it is a massive challenge, I think, for the Gaeltacht communities. And as you know, the language itself has its own kind of, and it'll evolve in a certain way online or whatever it's going to look like. But how it existed as a community language spoken in real communities, I mean, that is the real challenge. But I suppose the only thing we can say, I mean, whatever about Édóchasach, I think that we have great reason to be extremely optimistic and extremely grateful to have people like you here who are standard bearers for the language, and who are making it a living language that is fun to be. And I think we do have to be, and I love what you say there, because I mean, one of the things, and as Irish people, we're inclined to be we want to be welcoming, we want to be friendly, we want to be polite, we don't want to exclude anybody. And so that's what I think we were a victim of our success in relation to all of that, and always kind of, if you like, accommodating people and going into English. But maybe now we need to come at that from a slightly different perspective.
I think we need to turn 1,000 welcomes and 100,000 welcomes back into Céad Míle Fáilte.
Oh, gandát a cara. A fáil na cara gur míle maithagad bhain me anna hanamh as an scéal a rainn tú ling berbua agus beannacht de cara.
Gur míle maigad flár.
Thanks for listening. Gur míle maithagad as a bheith éisteacht. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I would really appreciate your feedback. I would be eternally grateful if you would follow, rate and review the show. Please also be sure to sign up at thelanguagequestion.com/resources to get your free, valuable learning resources, and to ensure that you stay up to date with upcoming episodes, guests, and to receive exclusive content. Slán Tamil.